This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and this is EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians, aka ER docs, come to just be real and talk about things that are important to us professionally, personally, and otherwise. And I'm here today with Bill Green, who's an ER doc who is also an entrepreneur and started a very, very useful little gadget. We're always looking for building a better mousetrap, and this is actually a better mousetrap, the T-ring. And before we talk about that, Bill, I want to kind of talk a little bit about Ireland and what your connection to Ireland, because I know you're in sunny California right now, but tell me a little bit about your connection to Ireland.
Well, Mark, my connection to Ireland is basically my wife, Kate, who you met. But we moved over there about 9 years ago. So I've been practicing at Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, California for 20 years, but was able to finagle a way where we could follow my wife's wishes and move back to the country where she grew up and was raised there. So we took, 4 kids, 2 dogs, and a horse from San Clemente to Ireland about 9 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so we live there. The kids are in school there. I commute about 6,000 miles to work. Which, if there's anybody out there that can beat that, let me know. That's another discussion, but I think I'm in the top 5 anyhow. But a beautiful place, and as I've said to you, you got to come visit. It's a lovely place. But yeah, so that's connection. So I get the sunshine over here, I get the beauty and the fun of Ireland over there. But yeah,
you get the sunshine in California, you get the rain in Ireland. That's got to be. Come out over here, dry your skin out, and go back over there and get it back moisturized again. That sounds like a
yeah.
Good
So
deal.
look, it works out great. I mean, gets away from the crazy states that are getting crazier every day, but
Yeah.
worked out
Okay,
well.
now let's talk about T-ring. You've done this for a long, long time. Let me give you a little bit of you talk about first. You talk about the thing that got you involved in with T-ring and how it actually how you invented it, shall I say?
Yeah, so I was a chairman of an emergency department down in the South, and we had the misfortune of having 3 bad outcomes, and all which actually led to malpractice cases related to finger injuries in about a 10-month span. 2 of them were tourniquet-related complications. The other one was a doc who didn't use a tourniquet, missed a foreign body that led to an infection and a bad outcome, and the plaintiff's attorney argued that he had met the standard of care, which is to always explore the wound to its full depth through a full range of motion in a bloodless field, right? So, my goal was to go to literature and just kind of learn, hey, how are we supposed to do this, and what are we supposed to use, and what's the best way? And I was struck with the literature very clearly says, look, to minimize the chance that you're going to miss these injuries, which are a lot more common than you think. I mean, nearly 25% of all ER litigation is wound related, and most of that's missed tendon and nerve injuries and missed foreign bodies. And most of the tendon and nerves are in your finger, right? So these little innocuous looking 1 or 2 centimeter finger lacks that we kind of wash out and historically have sutured up are the ones that are really going to get you into trouble. So the literature very clearly said, hey, look, you have to do your wound explorations in a bloodless field. If you go to the ASEP related literature, they would say that you actively achieve hemostasis, i.e. use a tourniquet. But on the other hand, I could find 5 or 6 articles on everything that we had used or I had always used, which included a Penrose drain or cutting the finger off a glove and rolling it up the finger, or the commercial silicone band tourniquets, 5 or 6 articles that say you shouldn't use them. And primarily, they all apply pressure that greatly exceeds the pressure that's known to cause nerve injury. But the other one is the low profile methods occasionally get left on a digit and bandaged over, and you come back with a dead finger. And and I think I've said that to you say, geez, I would never do that, that's crazy, you got to be an idiot. But in 2010, which kind of coincided to when we started releasing our product, the UK essentially sent out a letter to all their providers saying, look, if you use a surgical glove or if you use these low profile methods as a finger tourniquet and you have a bad outcome, you're on your own.
Thank you.
Yeah, and they probably said, look, we feel like we're on our own anyways. But
how new is that idea? Well, you're on
Well,
your own. Of course, I'm on my own. I've been on my own for for
right.
three decades
Well,
here. You know.
in the public health system of the NHS, providers thought, well, we might not have all we need, but at least we feel like you got our back. Well, they were basically saying we ain't got your back.
We're not giving you back. Hey, well, okay. Now here's the time that I'm going to insert my own personal story. Okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to be on a video of this. Some of you are going to be listening just with your podcast, driving to work or work out or whatever. But I'm holding up my index finger, not my long finger. I'm not doing anything to Bill here, but I'm showing you a healing wound that I recently had of a surgery to my right index, dorsal right index, where I had a myxoid cyst, a real common little, thing that the hand surgeon took off, and not a big deal. And so I was kind of interested to see what he used. I was going to try to tell him what to do. I was going to take my T-ring in and said, hey, how about using this? And I thought, no, I'm not going to, screw up the relationship by trying to tell him what to do. So I was curious, what is he going to use after he puts my block in? And he put in a very effective, a digital block, and then he rolled on tourniquet, and we had a little discussion about tourniquet and T-ring and all this sort of thing. And he had the surgery; it all went very well. He cut the tourniquet off, and by golly, my finger, not the wound, but my finger hurt for a week. And it wasn't related to the wound; it was related to the nerve injury that went from the tourniquet. And I, Bill and I have talked about this for several years. You've been advertising and going back and forth at ASAP and talking about this. And it's my first experience at actually understanding. I wasn't sure that my finger sensation was ever going to return, because I tell you, that finger hurt, and it wasn't the wound. It wasn't the wound that hurt. It was the whole finger, the whole dang thing that hurt, and I could feel, and it was actually on the plantar, the palmar side, and the surgery was on the dorsal side, and I'm convinced, and I think you're probably correct, in that was a neuropraxia from prolonged nerve compression from that stinking tourniquet. I have big hands, okay, and so
Yeah.
the only have is they don't make tourniquets in sizes,
Right.
and so I'm living proof. Okay.
Uh, well, yeah, exactly. And without question, you had a neuropraxia. I mean, so the studies would show that even if you take the right size tourniquet, and this is, there's a study out of the UK in 2008 that looked at all the stuff that we always use, and they made a big point of trying to minimize the pressure. So they did stuff that you and I never did. Like, they will measure the circumference of the digit before they decide what tourniquet they're going to use or what size glove to use. And even following the manufacturer's recommendation for the appropriate size, they found that the average pressure applied by the correct size tourniquet was nearly 700 millimeters of mercury. Now, a backdrop of that is, for a digit, you need between 90 to 120 millimeters of mercury to achieve digital hemostasis. And that's even in very hypertensive patients.
Yeah.
And for the literature would say, for any upper extremity case that's going to the OR, you should shoot for 200. You might need 250, but you should never ever exceed 300 millimeters of mercury. And it's well documented in the literature, tourniquet-related nerve injuries and neurovascular injuries. And of course, as soon as you start exceeding that 250 to 300 millimeter mercury, the risk that you're going to cause a nerve injury goes up exponentially. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple studies done in the 80s that looked at ring-related tourniquets on limbs and the incidence of nerve injuries, and they did EMG studies to look. One study had 72%, the other had 77% of all their cases had EMG proven nerve dysfunction that lasted an average of 2 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Acutely that manifests as pain, but the long term is, hey, I got decreased sensation, and some that never went away. So, look, I think.
I can tell you that my finger, that's my right index. I can tell you that the sensation is not yet.
Sorry, Mark. So the other thing I'd say is, And it's not time related. I mean, people think, hey, geez, yeah, if they keep this on for an hour or two, the certainly the ischemic injuries, those are time related, and it actually takes quite some time. But the pressure related injuries can occur quite quickly. I mean, we've all banged our ulnar nerve on something,
Yep.
and you get that sharp pain, and then it feels numb. I mean, that's a second of just too much pressure, right? I mean, you get that acute trauma.
Right.
So there's studies in the literature that says, look, you have too much pressure for the order of minutes, and there's certainly tons of studies I could show you that a digit tourniquet was only on for 10 to 15 minutes, and they took it off, the patient couldn't feel their finger, or the blood flow didn't return to the digit, because it's actually enough pressure where you cause intimal wall damage of the digital arteries that then leads to coagulation, cascade, and clotting, and they basically clot off your finger. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, it's crazy stuff. And look, we all did it. I used everything. I used Penrose drains and tourniquets and cut gloves off because we didn't have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, and we also thought that that it's really a minor injury. That's the other issue. I think that what you're kind of alluding to and what we're discovering is that even though our hands are the most important, well, to some people, the most important appendage.
Yes.
Maybe we have to cut that. I don't know. But certainly, your dominant hand is probably the most important, most useful appendage that you have. And to diminish that capability through a minor injury, um, if we don't appreciate the fact that these have potential for problems, we've missed something. In other words, so here I am. I'm looking at my right hand, my right index, which is probably the most important digit of my entire hand, and a single little band around the end of it almost permanently injured the sensation there, which is, who'd have thought it?
Yeah, well, it's crazy and it's common, and you know, I firmly believe that, look, ER docs are out to do the right stuff, right? I mean, we're interested in outcomes and we want the best for our patients. And if that's not enough to kind of get you to do the right thing, the other part of it is, that guttural fear that I'm going to screw
Get
up
your
and
ass
get surgery.
sued.
Yeah, so for me, it's like, look, we finally have a thing um, that anybody can put on any size digit. The pressure is always going to be the same. you know
Yep.
it eliminates the risk of too much pressure. Why would you do anything else?
Right.
And part of that is, yeah, sure, I've spent 12 or 14 years, and when you get involved in something else, it can take over your life. But it's more that, I may be like you, I don't know, Mark, but I have very little patience at this point in my career for ER docs that um, I don't want to say that don't do the right thing, but whether it's ER docs or any docs, it's probably more my consultants where I just don't have any patience for them not, coming in the middle of the night or doing the right thing. And it's at this point, when you have an option that's better, you got to give me a really compelling reason why you're not doing it.
Right.
Especially for us in this case, where it makes your life easier. I mean, literally, teaming you slide it on. I don't worry about, hey, pressure, too much pressure. And this is, I'm sliding this on 8-month-old infant pinkies or
Yep.
real great toes. I slide it on, I know it's going to be safe. It gives you a truly bloodless field, so I'm not dabbing. I get a great exam. And I tell all our docs and PAs and NPs, and when I teach, I say, and you document that you did your wound exploration in a bloodless field, because the case we had, the plaintiff's attorney basically said, doc, so let me get this right. This was the doc that didn't use a tourniquet, missed the foreign body that got infected. She said, so the standard of care is that you get in there and you bend that finger and you probe around with, your Q-tip or whatever, and you're moving tissue and you're putting it through a full range of motion, and it didn't bleed. I mean, it must have bled because digits are really vascular and they bleed a lot. So it must have bled a little bit, right? Because you missed the injury. And now on follow-up, because I'll review malpractice cases, plaintiff's attorney are acutely aware of this. I mean, if you miss a tendon or nerve injury or you miss a foreign body and you didn't use a tourniquet, you're screwed.
Yeah.
They'll argue all day long. So most of the time those are settling. Most the cases are one of the most common, but they're lower dollar values. But I can tell you one that settled for over $800,000 on an injury because it spread up into the limb and led to an amputation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy
Wow.
stuff. You know? I mean,
Oh,
we've
wow.
all seen the crazy stuff, but in any case,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
So
tell me about the, not everybody can see. Do you have a
yeah,
T-ring there with you? If
uh,
you don't, I do.
no, yeah, I
Well, you can
do.
describe it verbally.
Yeah, so I have the old style, um, and actually, just because this is sitting on my desk. So yeah, so I got the kind of
Yep.
this is the one that's been around for 10 years, right? So
Right.
this is, and for people that don't know, the little ears on the end, that's your 2-point discriminator. So, you know, I don't have to slap our docs for not doing their sensory exam. So it's right there, you know.
Right.
Um, and so you simply just
Describe it
slide
for
it
the
on.
people. Describe it for the people that are only listening. Okay. Imagine
Okay.
I'm driving down the road.
Yeah, so basically T-ring, it's a one size fits all tourniquet for digits. The original one has a solid outer ring with a central flexible membrane that has a central hole that you slide over any digit. It adjusts to the size of the digit automatically as you put it on, and that's the way it keeps the same pressure on any size digit. So I don't know how we can best see here, but you just simply
Okay.
slide it on the finger.
Just, it's a
And
ring. It's
yeah, the
a,
nice thing about that is it exsanguinates the digit. My light isn't great here, but it
no, I
as
can
you
see it.
slide it on, it squeezes all the blood out of the finger.
Right.
So I don't know if you can appreciate, but my index finger is pale compared to the other ones.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I can see that. And also I can see that the band itself kind of spreads the pressure out over the finger. Not only is it less, as you said, it's not several hundred millimeters of mercury. It is enough, but it's not too much. Yep,
right,
there
and,
you go.
and what happens is when you have a little tiny finger like an infant's pinky, you get a narrower band, and as I apply that to a larger and larger digit, that band widens out, which follows the literature recommendation. I mean, if you go to a pneumatic cuff in the OR, they said, look, the larger the limb, the wider your tourniquet should be, just to more diffusely and evenly spread out that pressure so you don't cause nerve injuries. Well, that's what's exactly what happens here. You know, so if I put this on my great toe, that band that currently is probably a 1/4 inch is going to get closer to a 1/2 inch. Um, and so this was the original guy, and some features about this is you can maybe see that outer ring is narrowed at the central portion, and that's
Right.
so you
That's
can,
that was so you could snap it, right?
right, and ultimately, you know, we still use this. I developed this T-ring flex, which I have one. I just have to open it up. Um, so some docs just don't read instructions. So I had a hand surgeon out of the UK call me and say, "Hey, Bill, you know, I've been using this for a couple of years. I love it, but I had a case the other day that I didn't use it." I said, "Well, tell me about it." She said, "Well, I had this bad paronychia, it was pretty infected, and I didn't want to drag your T-ring over the end of it because I was concerned I might spread that infection up the digit, right?" And I said, "Well, did you know you could snap it so you could stretch it so you can actually make that central hole wide enough so you can actually get it over whatever part that you need to get it over and then relax it so you can still exsanguinate it." And she goes, "Oh no, I didn't know you could do that." You know, and I heard that. I go to ASAP and tell that story because people would tell me, "Hey, I had this crush injury and I had this hanging flap and I don't want to drag that little hole over." And I said, "Well, you know, you could snap it and stretch it and, you know, and stretch it over the injury, and then as soon as you're past the injury, let it relax so you can exsanguinate." So then I developed the T-ring flex for, so this guy is all flexible. There's no hardened outer ring, and it's really easy to kind of stretch. So you can get that over the, you know, the end and then slide it up. And the other advantage of that is it's a little narrower. So if you're putting on the narrow space, like a 5-year-old's inner toes, that's
Hmm.
really the only time you get an issue with the T-ring being too wide. The original T-ring is the little tiny space in kids' toes. So the nice thing about this is you can stretch it and get it over those injuries. Like, you know, I used to, you know, have injuries where I wouldn't use a surgical glove and roll it up, or I wouldn't roll a tourniquet up just because those are both tightly adhered. If you get to a flap or a crush injury, you're
Yeah.
dragging it across and catching the skin or ripping it off, or, you know, so it just makes it handier.
Yeah.
Um, we still use both. I mean, when people ask me which we use, I say if you're in-house, if you're in the ER, if you're in an office, and you have two hands where you're putting on someone, go with the T-ring flex. we provide the original teaming to a lot of military or pre-hospital guys, EMS, where they want to have that in their pocket. So if they get an injury, they can take it out and slide it on themselves. So the original T-ring is the one to do with that. Solid ring, you can slide it on easily with one hand. T-ring flex, you got kind of two hands to slide it up. So a lot of our pre-hospital providers will stick with the original T-ring. And we've included those in kits. We sell a little finger cut kit that I think I gave you one of them. And next time you cut your finger, I said, I think you remember the only caveat is you got to send me a picture. Because, I tell people, the vast majority of finger injuries we see don't need to be in the ER, right? I mean, I told you it's probably less than 5% of finger injuries have any deep tissue injury. So 95% of these or better are 1 to 2 centimeter finger cuts,
Yep.
And the only reason they end up in the ED is because they bleed and they bleed and they bleed, right? So if you can get the bleeding stopped, then most of the time you can clean them off, dry them off, get them closed tightly with a steri strip, and you're done. And that's ultimately kind of the thinking too that led me to that whole topical laceration closure.
To talk about that, I want to hear about. I don't think the listeners, unless they've seen you at ASAP, know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so for years now, I've been trying to get people to stop suturing finger lacerations. And look, and we all do it. That's what we've always done.
Right.
But if you walk through the literature, and the primary literature piece that got me thinking about this was the 2002 UC San Francisco study that looked at our normal care of finger lacerations, which is to open up the lac tray, do the dig block, wash them out, and put some sutures in it. And so they compare, and this was for finger lacerations 2 centimeters or less that had no deep tissue injury, which was better than 80% of the finger lacs that they saw. So they compared the normal process, which I just described, to merely a minute of tap water irrigation. Hey, if you can bend your finger normally and you can feel me touching you normally, if you met those simple criteria, all they did was put a Band-Aid on it. They didn't even make a point of approximating the wound edges. They said, okay, great, Band-Aid on it, off you go. They followed both groups for 3 months. And they looked at outcomes in terms of wound cosmesis and function, and they couldn't tell a difference. So they concluded, quote, there's no clinical benefit to suturing finger lacerations 2 centimeters or less. And not only is there no benefit, it takes you about 15 to 20 minutes longer. It increases pain because you're sticking a needle in their finger. There's a higher rate of infection in the sutured group. And as soon as you put in one suture, they got to follow up with someone in 10 days for suture removal. So they basically said, don't do it. Nice study. The problem for you and I and everybody else out there is that
Yeah, if they come in, if they walk in the door and they've just sustained at least a $700 bill, maybe more, who knows? And you go in there and say, "Hey, put a Band-Aid on it." Somebody's gonna be.
well, Mama Bear's gonna be coming across the table, with her 5-year-olds on her lap and
I
the finger
didn't
still
come
bleeding.
here for you to tell me to put a Band-Aid on it. Okay, I've heard that a few times.
Right. So you ask yourself, because that's the case, right? It's mom with her child still on her lap, the finger's still bleeding, or, the guy that's waited for 3 hours,
Right.
So that's the last thing you want to do. But you ask yourself, based on the UCSF study, hey, do I really want to open up the lac tray, do a dig block, especially on a kid,
Right.
to put in 1 or 2 sutures that has really no clinical benefit and has all that downside, right?
Right.
So, once I kind of got into the T-ring and I thought, okay, look, yeah, you slide this on and you truly have immediate hemostasis. And not only does that benefit you in your wound exploration and decrease your liability in terms of missed injury, but now you got a wound that's guaranteed not to bleed, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Look, we all love the lights of Dermabond. I mean, you see that kid that's got the little forehead lac and you say, oh yeah, that's that one I can Dermabond, or,
Right.
the elderly person that has that skin tear, which now, I'll glue most of those. So we use it when we can, but historically people don't use them on digits, right? And
Right.
the issues have been two. One is they bleed a lot, and I'm sure, you've used Dermabond or another topical skin adhesive at some point. And just when you think everything's perfect, you got that kid who you tried it off and you put it
pops
on,
open.
and then they move. And it starts to bleed, so you get this bloody purple amalgam of gooey crap. And I tell you, it seems like it just promotes the bleeding, because now once that happens, it just doesn't stop bleeding,
Yeah.
And so you're left with, okay, now I got to peel this off. You look like an idiot,
Yeah.
So either you say, hey, look, I'm gonna try this again, or you can suture it or whatever. But it's like,
All right.
so that's one reason why people I think refrain from using it on digits, because just when you start to apply it and you got it, the
Yeah.
hemostasis, they bend the finger. This is kind of
Mhm.
like pre-T-ring or not using a tourniquet, and it starts to bleed. So the T-ring kind of solved that problem, right? You can slide it on, and it's not going to bleed. Um, so the only other problem is, well, there's two other problems. One is the only downside with using a topical skin adhesive is getting the glue inside the wound edges, right? I mean, if you
Right.
have a laceration where you're trying to approximate the wound edges and then seal it, you just don't want to get it inside. And as we all know, finger lacs can be irregular. I mean, people get their fingers into everything. And so I see providers trying to hold these multiple flaps together and then glue it, and just at the wrong time the flap moves and you get inside the wound, and then you're all pissed off, and
Right. Or you glue the edge of the tweezers or your thumb or
oh
something like that.
yeah,
It's
yeah, right. So, and let me see, I must have a T-strip here. I actually have a kit. Oh, here's it. So the whole idea with this T-strip, so we did this study at where I work, where I was trying to get everybody over the hump of, hey, I'm still going to sew finger lacs for X, Y, or Z, right? And one of the humps was, hey, you can't use glue, it just comes off. I mean, people are going to go, they're going to bend their fingers, it's going to come off. So the initial study we did, we used the T-ring to stop the bleeding, and then we used Dermabond with or without steri strips. And the idea with the steri strips was, if you had a wound that was difficult to approximate the wound edges, we would use the steri strips first to get the wound edges aligned. So then you
sure.
can go ahead and glue it without worrying about getting the glue inside the wound edges.
Right.
If we had a laceration that was easy to approximate the wound edges, we would just glue that. Now, if we had one of those lacerations, but it was over the extensor surface of a joint, once the glue dried, we added the steri strips. And then if you had extra glue, you just put it on. And there are some studies in the literature that looked at doing that, like on chins, where they looked at the tensile strength of the wounds was stronger if you combine the glue and the steri strips, right? So on
Sure.
those bendy areas, people have done that. And there's been other studies in the literature that looked at using Dermabond and steri strips on bendy areas of kids, so fingers, toes, elbows, and knees. And they compared that to suturing, and they concluded this closing wise is as effective, and it's much better because you're not using the needles in kids, right? So there's
Right.
other articles in the literature that basically support this. So in our study, basically we did that, and I found two things. So the glue alone lasted, it was just under 9 days. Glue and steri strips added about a half a day. But what we found is and we were using 1/2 inch steri strips, that as you started to approximate the wound, one, you kind of lost sight of the wound, so you didn't really know is everything lined up perfectly. The other problem is the glue doesn't get through the steri strip very well.
Right.
So it seals the edges, but it doesn't soak through. So the more active people, it's likely to come off a little more quickly. And the third problem with that was, once you got that steri strip glued down, you're not going to see that wound until it all comes off. So generally that's kind of 9 or 10 days later. Now, if I did a crappy job of washing out your cut, and 3 days from now it starts to get red or starts to drain a little pus, you don't see it. So typically the
Yep.
patient's not coming back until a week later when it's really pussed out, and you're like, oh crap. So to solve that, or those issues related with the steri strips, I designed this T-strip, which I think I showed you at ASAP,
Yeah.
was this
Yeah.
clear
I've seen it.
porous mesh. So it's it allows you to see the wound the whole time you're kind of approximating it. And I'll kind of show. I took one out.
Yep.
So and I
Kind of.
don't know if you appreciate
It
it, but
kind of
as I
looks like a
told us,
Band-Aid. Okay. I
yeah,
remember when you
yeah.
put
So
it on me. It,
yeah.
it,
So
it
that's
looks
the
like
mesh.
yeah, the mesh, and it's actually we use these in Iraq when you pulled bellies together. You put a big slap of what looks like Saran wrap on somebody's belly, and you stretch it across. And when we were, doing crash surgery, we'd slap these things on and put them in the helo and take them to another place, peel off the plastic, and continue the surgery. It makes a
Right.
great. We didn't glue them.
Yeah.
But it's exactly the same idea. It's stretchy, it's porous, and when I saw what you did, I said, that makes perfect sense. You don't have to do a lot of explanation. It's stretchy plastic tape that's got a gazillion holes in it that you can glue right through it.
Right. And so I'll show you again. So it's so you
Yep.
see the match. So the nice thing about that is, and I'll apply it to my finger. It's a little bit hard to see, but because because I'm never doing this on myself, but
Yeah.
so, and the thing is, as you pull this across,
Yeah.
you can completely see the wound edges. Um, so when I wrap this, I'll line everything up. Of course, I'm struggling to see where my camera is. But
Oh, I
once,
can see it perfectly though.
yeah, so now that, and I can manipulate it to get the wound edges just where I want them, even multiple little flaps, and then I pull it tight. And now that I'm happy with where the wound edges are, now you just take your Dermabond or whatever TSA, and you kind of squeeze it onto the mesh and use the tip to work it through the mesh. And even a Dermabond Mini has enough glue to completely coat an
Yeah.
entire T-strip. And the nice thing about that is when it dries 60 to 90 seconds later, it's completely transparent. I mean, it's just like you don't even see the mesh. So you can see the wound throughout the healing stage until this simply sloughs off in about 11 or 12 days.
And your life has been finger injuries, but the truth be told, this can be used on any injury, any laceration, anywhere. And actually, it would it be great, a huge improvement over a lot of the stuff that we currently do. The wounds that are just a little too open to think about using just a glue.
Yeah, so yeah, elbows, knees, extremities, the superficial skin avulsions where, I see the old folks and they come in and they got this big skin tear, and
Yeah.
I'll peel those back and clean them off, and I try to, get the skin right back to where it meets the other edge, and frequently you're about a 1/8 inch short or a 1/4 inch short just because you can't pull it as tightly.
Yeah.
So I'll just bridge that gap with a T-strip and then just cover the whole thing in glue. And then a non-adherent dressing, and, tell them to.
There you go.
And
There you go.
I tell for all these people, I said, look, you can shower. I said, don't soak it. Try to keep it, dry for 5, 6, 7 days in terms of the soaking part. And if it's over the extensor surface of joint for digits, I will immobilize them for 5 to 7 days. Now, if I have someone who's a dishwasher says, hey, doc, I'm going back to work and I got to soak my fingers in a sink full of soap and
Yeah.
water for, I say, look, maybe this isn't for you. But I would say it's better than 80% of the finger injuries I see that I'm using topical skin adhesive with a T-strip. And then the other thing is, which I love to tell people, is that the treatment of superficial dermal avulsions, like tip avulsions, where there's just nothing there and there's nothing to sew,
Right.
and they just
Right.
bleed and bleed. Because I see these come in from the urgent cares. They spend an hour at the urgent care. The urgent care says, look, we can't get this to stop bleeding. And then they send them to me. And as you mentioned, as soon as they walk through my ER door, I mean, maybe I'm in a higher end ER than you, but they're not going to leave with a bill that's less than probably $1,200.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and there's a study a few years ago in the New York Times about the crazy cost of healthcare. And the case that they highlighted through this kind of 2-page article in the New York Times was a finger laceration. And they actually have a map of the US that shows like 8 different regions, and it says how much it costs to get a couple sutures in your finger in where
Yeah.
you live. And it
Yeah.
ranged from like, $800 to $1,400, $1,500. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I literally want to stand in my lobby in my ER and just tell people to turn around and go home, for all kinds of stuff. But, for these finger injuries, it's like, here, take a T-ring, slide it on, just dry it off, and just put some steri strips on,
Yeah.
because it's, look, and I tell people, most of these, if they come in and we did nothing at all, other than maybe wash it out, they would heal fine. I mean, the UCSF study told us that, right? If you just clean it out real well and bandage it, these things are going to heal,
Right.
So if we're doing stuff like opening up black trays and doing ditch blocks and putting sutures, as soon as you put that suture in and now they got to follow up, we're taking something that could have been a no visit thing and they'd be fine, and we're forcing them to follow up with somebody, right?
Yeah.
And now these days, if you follow up with your family doc and to get sutures out, you're going to pay $100 to $200. I mean, it's an office visit and
Right.
whatever it is, So
Yeah.
at the very least, I tell people, look, make this a 1-visit thing, even if I'm compelled where it's a bigger lack, or I feel like I got to put some, whether it's a finger or a chin. I'll tell them, look, bite the bullet, do the DIDS block or inject the chin lac, put in your absorbable deep sutures, pull the muscle or the soft tissue together and take the tension off the wound. And then rather than putting in your transcutaneous stitches, T-strip to pull it together, glue it, and you're done. They don't have to follow up, And the nice thing is, with that in place, they can see if it's getting red or infected, which, the chance of that is kind of on the order of 5 to 7%. or less if you do a good job of washing it out, you know. And for fingers, washing it out can be just tap water irrigation, you know. I mean,
You,
we've
you
seen those
know,
better.
we sort of I wouldn't say disparage, but certainly we look at the injuries that don't need to come to the emergency department. And I can tell you that as an ER doc who comes in and says, you know, you've done a really great job of taking care of this so far. All I really need to do is X. You know, people really appreciate that. You know, they've talked to somebody who has looked at 1,000 or more of what they have, and they've never seen it before. And yes, you and I look at it and go, that doesn't require anything. Or, you know, I can put a steri strip on it, and the very fact that we've put something on it, took care of it, and told him exactly what to do, they don't mind. They really don't mind because an expert has told them. That laceration on Johnny's chin looked horrible to them. I mean, it bled like crazy. That finger laceration, they didn't know what to do with it. And you get in there and you, first off, you control the bleeding. Now everybody relaxes. You clean it out. You tell them, nope, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this. And we're going to put this little bandage on here that's painless. It has glue on it. And you wear it for a week. It's going to come off by itself. Everybody goes home happy. And
Yeah.
so I don't look at these and say, you know, this is some sort of a charade or an act or a Hollywood thing. I've come to really believe in the power of reassurance and education. I find that a whole lot of what I do for patients is education.
Oh,
And they're
absolutely.
happy. It doesn't have to be a surgical procedure. They're happy if I tell them, nope, this is all you need. And I've seen, you know, 30,000 of these, and they all do fine. So let's make sure there's nothing more serious than that, and they go home happy campers.
Oh, for sure. And it's expectations. And a lot of times, I mean, as you know, you know, providers don't help themselves. I mean, the whole antibiotic thing would tell you that, right? Oh, let me just give
Yeah.
you a little antibiotic for your URI. It's like, you know, kill me. You know, I mean, and back to the Ireland reference. So we have a little doctor in our village, and we're literally right on the village square, right? So we're mostly shops. There's a couple homes, and you know, 150 feet from me is the village doctor. So our family friends would go to the village doctor for the URIs and the stuff. And when I'm in town, they'll usually give me a call, my good friends. But when I'm not, they'll go to this guy, and you can go in there for anything, and you're going to come out with an antibiotic. You know, I mean, it's like I said, man, you've got to be kidding me. You know, so we don't help ourselves. But you know, for stuff like this, I totally agree. I mean, education is the key. And in these cases, most of the time, we need to do some wound closure, right? I mean, the most important thing we do
Yeah.
is clean them out, wash them out. But really the kind of the message I'm trying to get to people is most of these things don't need to be sutured. I mean, if you
Right.
got a finger lac that's less than 2 to 2.5 centimeter, or if you got one of those other, you know, extremity lacs or skin avulsions that are pretty size, like you said, you know, a lot of these we feel totally comfortable just using a topical skin adhesive. There's some that are a little bit more where you say, geez, do I need to suture that? Or if it's on an elbow or something like that, or it's gaping a little bit more, I'm going to have a hard time putting it together.
Right.
Look, in the case where you're not sure, go ahead and put some deep sutures in, and then glue the skin. On a lot of these, you can just, you know, wash it out, T-strip to totally approximate it, and glue it. And if you need to immobilize it, you know, if it's on a digit, put a splint on it. And that's it. Now, the nice thing about using topical skin adhesive, it also has that kind of side benefit of it does seal the wound, you know, and if you have
Right.
people that are out and doing stuff, it seals the wound. For those tip avulsions, you know, that everybody's using Surgisil or, you know, crazy stuff like cautery, you know,
Ooh.
the advantage of the glue, and I didn't completely walk through, but these really, you need nothing other than a T-ring and your topical skin adhesive. Now, if you're feeling compassionate, you throw in there a little topical lidocaine. But people used to come in, I used to open up a laceration tray, I'd do a ditch block, you know, and then
Right.
I'd figure out how I'm going to stop the bleeding and then what I'm going to do with it, right? And people historically will do a pressure dressing just to get them out of the ER. Some people will use Surgicel or gel foam, and that gets them out of the ER. But everybody's seen these things come back because they've rebled, you know. And if you look at the literature, you use something like gel foam or Surgicel, 2 days later, they're supposed to soak it every day and then do daily dressing changes.
Right.
And these things are demon for just drying out and cracking and rebleeding, right?
Right.
So, and I think I started to tell the story about that, you know, they come in from the urgent care Now they got their bill for $1,500. But I just gave a talk at, our hospital has probably 30 urgent cares in the surrounding communities to all their docs. So look, guys, and when I started doing this probably 7 or 8 years ago with the tip avulsions, my son at that time was 3 or 4. I said, look, my 4-year-old can fix these, right? You slide a T-ring on, get it to stop bleeding. Now, a lot of these you could just put the dermabond on. I mean, and people you see, they
Right.
have the pain. It's just that exothermic reaction, from the dermabond.
Right.
It's not stinging. It's just the exothermic reaction. And in general, people can minimize that by the first layer of dermabond you put on anybody. Just put a thin layer. If you're putting a gobs of dermabond, they're all going to have that. So if you put a little
It's
thin
going to
layer
cook a little
first
bit.
and then put it on, that helps. But for these tip avulsions, what I'll do is I'll hold the avulsed area flat like it's a swimming pool. Now, usually what I'll do is I'll put the T-ring on, I'll rinse it out on the tap for 30 seconds, and then I'll just squirt some 2% lidocaine gel onto a gauze and say, hey, stick your finger in that for 5-10 minutes. Or you can put, 5 cc's of the lidocaine that you normally would inject into a cup. It works great. I mean, these things just suck up the lidocaine. So no more ditch blocks, just topical anesthesia. Rinse the stuff off, dry it off, and then you just fill what's essentially a crater. I mean, it's just just fill it with glue. And then do a second later where you kind of spread it around, wait 60 to 90 seconds, take the T-ring off, and truly you're done. And then the nice thing is you've got this injury that 3 minutes earlier was just pumping out blood, and now it's completely sealed. I mean, and this is without the T-strip. On these tip avulsions, I'll do the glue directly, because what you want is that glue to just kind of fill in and the liquid nature of it, get in all those nooks and crannies, and when it dries, it just seals all those little bleeding capillaries. Occasionally I'll take the T-ring off and I'll see that I missed a spot and there's just a little blip of blood. Just put it back on and hit it with another dab. But the nice thing is now you've got this protective cap that in our study lasts over 12 days. So it keeps the moisture in, right, which is the ideal healing environment, but also keeps dirt and bacteria out. And it covers all those little nerve endings, so it's not as sensitive as just running around with the end of your finger exposed to everything.
Yeah.
And then it just sloughs off. The Ebenezer Scrooge, since we're in a Christmas season, advantage of that is you can bill for it. I mean, before, when you're doing gel foam and Surgisil, you can bill out your level 2 visit, or if you did an X-ray, a level 3 visit. But you couldn't bill it out as a wound closure. If you wash it out and you say, hey, I close this wound with dermabond, then you can do your procedure,
Sure.
as well.
Sure. And it works. The nice thing is that it works, and that's what people don't mind paying for, is when they actually do something. I see these from deli injuries, the meat slicers.
Right.
And
All day long.
I always wonder where the fingertip. Who did somebody eat that fingertip? Did it come in with the ham or the turkey? What is this little thing here that? That must be good. Honey, let's just pickle it and eat it. They don't think about it being the deli slicer's fingertip. But everybody's happy because they're all panicked. Oh my gosh, I cut off the tip of my finger. Right. And you go in and you reassure them. You put on the T-ring. Suddenly it's not bleeding anymore. Everybody relaxes. Like you say, now you've got it numb, and everybody goes, "Wow, that's the kind of thing I hoped." And then there's no needles at all.
Well, yeah, and the story I tell everybody about is, mom brings in her, kind of going back to your education thing or misperceptions or just the way things have always been done. Mom brings in her 18-month-old. Who, basically had about a 1 centimeter lac over the dorsum of his middle phalanx. And that's about as wide as an 18-month-old finger is, right?
Right.
So it comes in, of course, it's bleeding. And so stretch the T-ring on so I didn't even touch his cut, wash it out. You could tell from halfway across the room that it didn't get through the sub-Q. So it's basically, 1 centimeter cut, but
yep.
She was there because it just bled and it bled and it bled.
Right.
So washed it off, dried it off, pushed it together, T-strip, glue, and literally I was done in 2 minutes, T-ring off. And mom looks at me and she says, "That's it?" I said, "That's it." And she looked kind of pissed off.
Really?
Yeah. And she goes, and I'm thinking the same thing. Really? Like, what did I do? I'm nice,
Yeah.
I said hi to little Johnny and, held up the little stuffed animal and all that. And she goes, I was here about a year ago with my 4-year-old.
Yeah, that's what she was pissed about.
Yeah, he had essentially the same injury. The doc had two guys, of course, big brute guys, hold him
Oh,
down. The doc stuck a needle in his finger 4 or 5 times. My son screamed for the next 20, 25 minutes while they were suturing him. He was all sweaty and traumatized, you know. And then a week and a half later, I say, hey, we're going to go see Dr. Joe, your pediatrician buddy, to get your sutures out. And he started screaming. He
yeah.
was so traumatized from before. She said, why didn't they do this? And I said, well, it's just kind of an evolving way of doing
Oop,
things, right?
oops.
Yeah, so I was happy that she wasn't pissed at me. you know. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's crazy. I think it's crazy now that we're doing dig blocks to fix these lacks that if otherwise they hadn't shown up. Look, the vast majority of these would have healed fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
look,
they're still going to
I'm
come in. I know what you're saying, but that's internal conversation of ER docs. We're looking at them and saying, if you'd call me, all my friends, they all call me and take pictures and say, should I go to the ER for that? My universal answer is almost always no.
yeah,
And but they do show up, and when they show up, they expect care. But what they really are hoping is that they're not going to get something that's more painful, and you've given them an opportunity to actually fix this, just like that mom discovered, to fix
right,
it, to their satisfaction, and not hurt themselves or their children or their grandmother any more than absolutely is necessary. So
right, yeah,
that's EP Talk and EPM have been on the forefront of trying to promote emergency physicians who actually see problems and who develop solutions. And we're still doing it. I just talked to some people about some interesting breakthroughs not too long ago. If you're not listening, if this is the first time you've seen EP Talk, you need to go back through and there's some very, very interesting things both back and or they're on the docket to be talking about very soon about true improvements. And a lot of times it's just emergency physicians, just like Bill, who encountered a problem and then said, well, how can we fix this? How can we do a better job of this? And it sounds simple, Bill, it sounds like a real simple solution that you came up with, but it works. It's an improvement. People appreciate it. It makes our lives better. It makes the patients' lives better. And this is the kind of thing that we, as a magazine, as a podcast, are hoping to promote. And we're at the end of our podcast, but I want to tell everybody that I appreciate you signing on and listening. If your emergency department doesn't have T-ring, and the name of the bandage is
right.
T-strip,
T-strip. Try to keep it
T-strip.
simple for you, Mark. T-ring, T-strip.
T-ring and T-strip. The website that they can go to is tring.com, right?
Yeah, tring.com, yeah, and it'll show all
T-ring.
that. We have the little tray that includes all the stuff, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. I mean, my email is on there, so clinical
Yep.
questions. But hey, it's all there, and your risk managers will love it. You guys will love it just because it's quicker and easy. So
I wish my hand surgeon had. I wouldn't have had a lot less discomfort with it.
well,
Thanks, Bill, for coming on the podcast, and it's great talking to you. I'm glad you're back in the States, I guess. Although when I was in Ireland, I really, really enjoyed Ireland. So
yeah,
thanks for coming on, and for all of our listeners and people who are watching this, thanks for joining EP Talk. Hope to catch you next time, and we'll sign off now. Thank you. Okay, that